Her story deals with a subculture of heavy metal music that some feel is sending a dangerous message to your kids.
The forces of evil on the dark side of devil right.
And I want to talk tonight about the devil and demons and witches and wizards.
And we just mix it up with hardcore and aggression and come out with something we think's an original sound.
Loud, fast, heavy, you know.
Well, what do you got?
What do you got?
And welcome back to another episode of Riff Worship, where we discuss all things of the riff, what makes a riff, how a riff. And I'm joined again by my co-host, Austin Paulson, the pride of Chicago, Illinois, Lower Indiana, as I like to call it on occasion. And then we are joined by the oldest man on the planet, Justin Swindle. How are you guys doing?
I'm just as close to Indiana as Austin.
That's true. Like probably closer, honestly.
Yeah. That's very true.
Which is not something I'd like to be personally, but
we are an Indiana sandwich, you and I.
Oh boy. That's a terrible sandwich.
At least you guys like grew up like around Indiana. I grew up in Arkansas. Like
that's
it's just,
what
it's the armpit of the South. It's far worse than Indiana.
It was the middle finger of the South.
That is true. That is something only a few of us are ever going to get.
Maybe the United States, the South is pretty fucked up looking, because every time someone's like, "Oh, that's the armpit of the South," or "This is the middle," like, what? How does where are things at? Like, it's just a blob that's like, kill me.
Fucking Cronenberg blob.
Yeah,
the South is a Cronenberg blob.
I was gonna say it was Joseph Merrick, like just all knotted up. I am a human being.
Anyway,
you guys been okay? Everything's good, you know.
Yeah, sure.
Everything's all right. This is already going off the rails.
Wow, how fitting for the title.
Yes. How tie in. I've gathered both of you guys here today to talk about a record I have been wanting to dive into for quite some time. If we can even call it a record. It's an 18-minute long song, which is something I don't think any of us truthfully like. You know, we've always been one to go like, do you really need to write a song that long? I mean, yeah, you've got bands like Bell Witch, you've got bands like Sleep. Obviously, Rush did it many years ago. Mastodon, you name it. Different artists have created really long songs that have worked. And I truthfully believe that this is one of those long songs that works. And this is NOFX's The Decline. Kind of a weird suggestion from me, I would think, because you wouldn't really think of NOFX and riffs.
Well, you're a weird guy.
I'm a very weird man. You know, see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. There's three of us. We're all fucking weird. You know, you're one of us.
Speaking of NOFX and riffs, one of the few sources that you cited in research of this album, Mike in fact said a riff doesn't make the song.
Correct. Yes.
How do you feel about that?
I don't have to necessarily agree to what anybody ever says. I am a human
Especially
being.
not Mike.
Not even that. There's some things I do agree upon that he says, but that's just not one, you know? But when I heard this track, there are riffs all over this thing. And in particular, there are bass riffs that all over this thing. Some pretty big ones and pretty intricate sounding ones at that. And when I heard this song for the first time, that was the first thing I latched onto, is how the song opens up and it's immediately into a riff, right? And this song was no easy feat to write either, from the research I've done. I am probably a late catch on to NOFX. It was early part of the pandemic, and I felt the need to like dive down the rabbit hole and start listening to these different records I'd never heard. I'd obviously heard Punk and Drublick years and years ago and thoroughly enjoyed that record, and finally felt the need to like listen to basically the band's whole catalog, which is pretty vast, starting from their very first record all the way up to the record they had released by that time, which I think may have been an album with a coaster on it or something like that. And I found that there were a few of their records I really liked, and some of them were a little more, meh, for lack of a better word. Not my thing, but I realized that I latched onto the songs. The songs are really well written. He's definitely a guy that spends time when it comes to creating these songs, and I like his knack for lyricism. Definitely has some weird, intricate lyrics. I mean, there's lines in here that says Jerry only stayed a couple months, which I was like, that's funny. Like, I'll give him that. I mean, there's lines. There's a song called The Bruise on Punk and Drublic that is about a group of like Hebrew skinheads like going around just like tearing this town apart. And I think it's great. Psycho Meshuggahs is one of the lines in that song. He's got a knack for lyrics. I mean, if you listen to the album, The War on Errorism, he is taking the piss out of everybody in any political party on that album, as well as like Davey Havok, multiple other like members of big bands at that time. The whole nine. I love Fat Mike's lyricism. I think it's great. I think there are certain things that he will sing about that will definitely make you kind of look at it like you're watching like the Antichrist, with how you're just going, oh Jesus, like come on, man.
Chaos reigns.
It's like that. He's definitely not shielding anybody from what he writes about. Or I mean, he's also very aching to talk about any and everything that interests him. I mean, I listened to an interview about this EP we're talking about, and he went on a rant for 3 to 5 minutes about sexual preferences and things like that. He's got quite a few songs that dig into that. I mean, one of NOFX records was called S&M Airlines, which is, he's got a thing about BDSM. He's big into it, and he makes it very known. But my question for you guys is, I came late to this band. When was the first time you heard NOFX? If you guys have, and if maybe it was me suggesting it. What was the first time you heard NOFX, and what were your first takes on hearing The Decline?
I think this was probably the first NOFX album I've listened to. Somehow, I think I latched on to like 80s hardcore and stayed with hardcore through the 90s and 2000s, but like kind of ventured away from punk, like the genre.
Right.
I never really like got into a lot of 90s like kind of 3-chord punk bands. I only started listening to, like, you and I have talked about Anti-Flag, which I guess I wouldn't suggest anyone listening to now that shit has come out about that person, but I didn't start listening to them until like I was 20. And I kind of never really latched on to like Bad Religion or NOFX or anything like that. So this is kind of my first venture into NOFX.
When I think of this band, I think of video games. I think there is an era of maybe the early 2000s that, extreme sports was king. You had a lot of skateboarding video games. You had a lot of snowboarding video games. A lot of them have pretty similar soundtracks, a lot of pop punk and skate punk and stuff. So when I think of NOFX, I often think of Thug 1. I had like Pro Skater 4 and I had Thug 1, and the separation of church and skate was on Thug 1. I don't think I didn't really get into this band. I've been aware of them, kind of what Swindle is saying, that like era of like 90s kind of skate punk. I think the closest thing that I really ever got to was probably the Descendants or, Green Day even.
Right.
And I was much more into, older heavy metal and stuff like that by this point. So I think I leaned into that. I was into the Ramones, I was into Black Flag, but I never really quite got into this area of punk music, I think, or this era. Maybe later, but not really. It really just wasn't my thing. It is cool to kind of step out of your comfort zone and kind of look at this. This is an anomaly for this band. I think the quote that stuck out to me in kind of preparation for this was that Fat Mike said, "We're the most improved band out there."
Yeah.
Which is very funny, you know, and maybe I need to go back and listen to the EPs and stuff because
if you listen to those first 2 records, it's very evident.
Yeah. So that's cool. I like that. So I'd like to get more context. You know, I didn't really go back much further. This is really kind of the first thing that I listened to in full. Like, again, I've probably heard songs over like you show me Linoleum and stuff like that. You've definitely played stuff around me, but I can't say that anything's really latched on. So when you presented an 18-minute punk rock opera, you know, that's interesting. I definitely want to check it out and see what that's about. Can you think of any other punk rock operas out there? You know, is that a thing? The one that comes to mind. Yeah, and this is
Jesus of Suburbia.
It's Jesus of Suburbia, which the Decline is far better to me. But
absolutely,
you know, American Idiot was a huge record. Yep. I was in elementary school when that thing came out. My dad had a copy of that record before I had a copy of that record. You go. So if that tells you anything, but you know, can you think of any other punk rock operas?
So the only other thing I can think of is a song that directly influenced this song, which is a song by the Subhumans called, I think, Cradle to the Grave, which I only listened to in preparation for this podcast. I'd never listened to it before. I had tried to listen to the Subhumans many years ago, and they're a little too British for me. Like, it's cool. That song's very inventive sounding. Like, you can hear kind of like some Killing Joke-esque stuff, kind of that that later era of punk, I guess. You know, Swindle does not like British people, FYI.
We don't do well over there anyway, so it's fine. We don't, not that we do well here, but
we do even worse.
As I was saying, From Cradle to a Grave, that's the only other thing I could think of. That's also the name of a very great DMX movie, I believe. I think that's the one where he rides a quad through a window.
Hell yeah.
Come on. But that's the only other like punk rock opera, something that as long as this song could be. I missed out on the whole skate punk thing. I think that's got to do with maybe, obviously, Austin, you're decades younger than Swindle and I. But that's something Swindle and I missed out on too, because we are, maybe if we were born in like 85 as opposed to 90 and 89, we probably would have been dove head first into like the whole skate punk thing. We also am like, I am the most clumsy human being in the world. I'm never going to be on a skateboard. I fell off a skateboard one time and said, that's enough. And I wanted no part of it. And I didn't watch a whole lot of skate videos. That obviously came later with like CKY and Jackass. That was just for the slapstick aspect of that stuff. I have bursitis.
Well, I think it's hard to, you bring that up. I think that maybe the hurdle in getting into a lot of that stuff is a lot of it does sound the same to me. There's not a lot.
Yeah, I can see that.
And not that it necessarily has to reinvent itself or like be vastly different.
Right.
I think when I would have those video games on, it worked because it wasn't really like, I don't know. Some of those things definitely turned me on. Like I heard a lot of, metal and punk rock songs through those video games for the first
Kennedy's,
time.
The Clash.
Absolutely.
Goldfinger, Primus.
Goldfinger and Primus.
Goldfinger's on the first, Primus on the first Tony Hawk, and Dead Kennedys on the first Tony Hawk. Police Truck?
Right? Yeah.
So that's great. I remember
dropping into that fucking half pipe and hearing Jerry was a race car driver and losing my shit.
Wow. This is all, again, declining into just nonsense. But yeah, sometimes I feel like it's hard because a lot of it sounds the same. So, maybe the ones that are very good are there's also like a wave of copycats that are just doing the same shit. So, but clearly this band, kind of stands out in that they're able to write, 18-minute tracks. And, the history of this is pretty wild. I know how do you do it? How do you like sit down and write a song like this in an era where, Pro Tools is not a thing? As far as I know, this was recorded directly to tape. It's pretty wild. So, there's talent there. There's something there. There's songwriting capabilities within Fat Mike. So I'm curious to hear, maybe some of the research that you dug up on that.
So to kind of touch on the whole, like, I am so ignorant to like punk rock and even a lot of hardcore. I'm definitely more in the realm of like, if it's a hardcore band that sounds like a 90s metal band or more influenced with that, I'm going to be more interested. And with this band, I was 30, truthfully, by the time I got into this band, and I dug the whole catalog, but there's a certain era of this band's catalog from like 97 to maybe 03 might be the best years of this band. They had an album called So Long and Thanks for All the Shoes, which came out in 1997, which is a perfect record. Has every aspect of their songwriting on it. I mean, from like reggae stuff on up to just like, the opening track of that album is called It's My Job to Keep Punk Rock Elite. And that is very tongue firmly planted in cheek. It's like a minute and 15 seconds long. It's great. It's a great record. It's 30 minutes long. Pump Up the Volume, which is the album that came after The Decline. Another fantastic record. And then you had The War on Errorism, which came out in 03, which is a very political leaning record, to a point that like Fat Mike started putting out these compilations called the Rock Against Bush compilations on his Fat Records label. And those were a big deal, massive deal. There's actually great live footage of, I believe, NOFX playing Conan around that same era. And they're just bagging on Bush and Cheney and all sorts of them there. But this is the era of the band that really stuck out to me. Punk and Drublic, great record, great early 90s kind of punk record, all like Rancid, Green Day, Smash by Offspring. The album after that, which is Heavy Petting Zoo, is not good. Even Mike himself has said like, yep, that record really doesn't need to exist. I spent too much time worrying about how the song should sound as opposed to just letting the songs write themselves, which completely contradicts what he said when he wrote this thing. So the writing of this song, it's not a record, it's a song. It's an 18-minute long song. It was written over 6 months, and it was basically using riffs that he had compiled over, I believe, a 2 to 4 year period during this. And he basically has stated in the interview we listened to that, I just had riffs. You're out on tour, you have a tape recorder. Think about that. You have a tape recorder. You're just recording melodies and riffs that you have. You just put them on there, and then you see what you have at the end of a tour. And he's like, they're just riffs. As Swindle said earlier, a riff doesn't make a song good necessarily. I don't necessarily agree to that, but it's also coming from two different perspectives. I think when you get to the bare basics of what like traditional heavy metal is, and heavy metal adjacent music, which is obviously a more punk rock thing and more punk rock adjacent, maybe there is more songwriting structure. It comes to that. Whereas in the heavy metal side of things, you can get one riff and you can write a whole song around that. And the riff will always be the center point. I mean, that's the hook in a heavy metal song. You look at songs like Inner Sandman, Symphony of Destruction, Hammer Smash Face, Rain and Blood. The riff is the thing that you're thinking of. Whereas maybe with like punk tracks, on occasion, yes, you do get a punk track that has a lot of riffs. Is it it's not Poison Idea, is it Poison Ruin? That was the more recent, that thing's got riffs all over it. That's a great record.
Harvest.
Yeah.
Is that the name of the record?
Yeah.
That's a really cool record. I think TSOL had riffs. I think the Dead Kennedys had riffs.
The fucking Damaged. Everybody knows the TV party riff.
Yeah.
And the opening of the album.
Yeah.
I can't sing it.
Rise Above. You look at Rise Above, look at Bad Brains, look at hell, you mentioned it earlier. But I digress. I think punk rock can have riffs, albeit maybe heavy metal is more centric to the riff. Maybe hard rock, heavy metal. And Swindle, Austin, you guys are definitely far more proficient in knowledge of punk rock than I am. A lot of the punk bands were kind of formed in, especially like hardcore, especially that like first wave hardcore was more, they basically formed bands because they didn't want to necessarily be lumped in. They were tired of hearing heavy metal music, hard rock music, overblown song structures, 14-minute guitar solos and drum solos at, arena shows or anything like that, out of a lot of frustration. And it's remarkable to think that, hardcore started in what, 83, if you really think about it, probably sooner, 81. You know, and then you look almost 20 years later and it's like, let's do an 18-minute long track. NOFX has been around since 83.
It's an interesting one because, yeah, it's an 18-minute, you know, journey of, you know, compiled riffs over a 6-month period. But there's also feeling. It's a lot of different movements and themes.
Oh, my God.
Not a lot of the parts, you know.
Little to nothing repeats.
Nothing really repeats. There's, like I said, themes. There's things that
the horns
are similar that kind of play out through the song, but they're it's a kind of one point A to point B kind of flowing movement. There's lots of different dynamics throughout the song. It's you know, it's kind of hard to write a song like that and not just be like, you know, a sludge or doom riff where it's like the same thing over and over again.
You're just
for it to make sense in 18 minutes is a very difficult thing to do.
There's a line from there's a quote from one of the guys from Floor who was also in Torch, and he said it's intimidation through repetition is kind of the semblance of when it comes to like sludge and like heavy metal music, right? But yeah, there's a motif on this song throughout the whole thing. And that's why I presume it took him 6 months to write the song. He wanted it to be good. And a big standpoint from the research I did is that he wanted all the parts to be good. He didn't want any fluff. He didn't want any filler. He wanted it all to be good and for it all to make sense. And that's what really struck me about it is it does. Like every single part has a reason. Every single part makes sense to the song. It's not just like, here's a part for the sake of having a part because we don't know what else to do. It all kind of flows pretty well. It's not just going up and down. It actually moves and flows. You know, this is a band that was influenced by the likes of the Subhumans, Bad Religion, RKL, which is a pretty crazy sounding band if you've ever listened to them. You know, they were influenced by their peers at that point. You know, you get to like 99 and they're one of the legacy acts on like Warped Tour at that point. I mean, Fat Mike and his wife at the time, Erin, created a record label called Fat Wreck Chords that's still around to this day, still putting out records. I mean, I think Fat Records has probably, during that era, helped punk rock become this huge thing, helped it stay with the Warped Tour crowd, helped all of that. Think of like, you could probably look at any larger band at some point and see that they spent a little bit of time on Fat Records with that.
The document that we made for this said there was over 300 releases for the record label.
Yeah, that was like a number I saw where it was like, you know, by, I don't know when that like stat was made, but I'd seen like, over 300 releases on that label alone. So,
and I'm sure that's on the light side at that. The funny thing about this record or this EP was NOFX was signed to Epitaph Records when this came out. So Epitaph put out So Long and Thanks for All the Shoes and Pump Up the Volume.
Is that Bad Religion dude's label, right?
Brett Gurwitz. Yep.
Yeah.
That's his label. Yep. And they were releasing the mainstays. So I guess Mike was like, you know what, might as well put it, you know, this is marketing hell. If I put this thing out, like, how are we going to sell this thing? An 18-minute long punk song. So I'll put it out, you know, worst case that happens, no one buys it. And then, you know, it's a boutique thing. Right. But it's a mini punk rock opera, and it's not as simple as just saying it's a punk rock song for the sake of being a punk rock song. It's a pretty deep song. You know, 99 was kind of a weird year for like politics, right? It was the Clinton administration. You know, I was fucking 9 years old. Swindle was 9 years old. You were 3. Is that right? No,
yeah,
you
99. I was in kindergarten in 99.
Yeah, you were 5.
Yeah.
So that really says a lot. It's like, you know, the U.S. was doing okay at that point. I don't know about the rest of the globe. And then basically Mike was like, I didn't really know what to sing about during that era. Everything was going pretty well for us. I was doing pretty well. So he just looked at like how cruel and like how ignorant American people were and how American people are. And if you look at the lyric, I did have the lyric sheet pulled up, but it is like it's pretty in depth to take a look at that. But basically it's like, people are stupid is the semblance. I mean, the opening line is, where are all the stupid people from? That's the opening line. But to get back to the recording process of this, Mike wrote the song, 18 minutes. He and the drummer, Eric Sandlin, Smelly, as we will refer to him because there's two Erics in the band, recorded it though. Basically, Mike said, you can't write an 18-minute song, give it to your band and have them and expect them to memorize it. Because this was tape we're talking about. This wasn't punch-ins. I mean, you could do punch-ins, but it was a little bit different. You could do overdubs as opposed to punch-ins. So they recorded it. They split it into 16 parts to record it. So basically, Mike played most of the guitar. He played the bass, did vocals. I'm sure the other members of the band, El Jefe and Eric Melvin, I'm sure did guitar layers and stuff for it as well. The whole band was part of it, and what I really appreciate about this band is they're not really, there's not a huge ego to them of like, oh yeah, let's just get this guy from this other band to play these parts because he's really good at them. There's some great guest spots on here. Bands I'm not familiar with in the least bit. I just thought it was cool. I believe the background vocals on the whole record are done by Spike Slauson, who is in Me First and the Gimme Gimmes. So like all the weird, all the harmonies you hear are him. I mean, all the ska parts are done by Nate Albert, who's in the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones. And then you've got, I believe the trombone is played by a gentleman named Lars Nylander, who is in a band called Shank and Pickle. Which I've never heard of. I've never heard of any of, like I know about Me First and the Gimme Gimmes. Like I've heard all those covers. But I'm not familiar with any of these other acts, but it's really cool to see. It's like, oh yeah, these are just my buddies, but I want them on this 18-minute long song that I'm writing. Production was handled by Fat Mike and Ryan Green, which is funny because Ryan Green's like, credentials read as he did Punk and Drublic, he did Strung Out Records, he did Propagandhi Records, but he also worked pre-production for Megadeth's Countdown to Extinction.
My God.
Which is fucking hilarious.
What a tie-in.
But this album was recorded at Motor Studios in San Francisco, California, which Mike and Ryan Green co-owned at one point. I'm sure that studio does still exist. But the writing was, I don't necessarily know how long it took to record the actual release, but I know 6 months of writing it, figuring out where the lyrics needed to go, all the parts, how they needed to flow into each other. I could only imagine recording this thing had to be a tedious act of, all right, we got to get this part. How many takes are we doing? How much money are we spending on tape? I believe Mike even describes that at certain points in the production, like multiple members of the band are on the board, like passing faders in, bringing them up, bringing them down to make things sound like right and make it sound good. He's like, that was, that's how you recorded back then. But it is a mixed bag on this thing. Like it's not just really one style. It's not just like, here's 4 guys playing 4 chords, which you mentioned Jesus Suburbia earlier. That sounds more like that to me. That sounds like 3 guys went in, recorded, and just played like pretty, rudimentary, like rock and roll, right?
Yeah. And
it sounds good. It's a cool song. Like it makes sense. It flows fairly well, but I think this one flows a little bit better.
Yeah. There's just, if I haven't listened to that song in some time, so, maybe I would need a refresher, but I think you're definitely right in saying that it sounds like those 3, maybe 4 people got on record and recorded their instruments. There's not, I don't remember there being, horn sections and, all these sorts of different things going on, harmony layers like this. There's a lot of really cool dynamics with this song. And, that definitely helps with an 18-minute runtime. You want to keep it interesting. You want, it slow down, changes in tempo, all sorts of things. So it definitely does that.
So there's no way that in the recording of this song that they ever intended to play it live. I just don't think there was any intention of that ever happening, because most people that record an 18-minute long track, that's kind of like an artistic endeavor. That's like, we're just going to put it out. If people like it, they like it. So what? I mean, it was almost 10 years before they played it live. And matter of fact, it was some show in some little club that was getting shut down because of a storm coming through. And they're like, all right, we have time for one more song. And like Mike leans over to the drummers like, we're playing Decline.
Which is wild that you would just randomly throw that out there and remember how to play the damn thing, you know, having never prepared for it really, unless that's like part of the warm up or, you know, rehearsals and stuff.
I don't know. I've read their book and there's not a whole lot that goes in depth about that. Eric Sandlin is a great drummer. I've heard him on every record. He doesn't do a ton of flashy stuff, but he's consistent. Like they've even said in like recordings, he's pretty good with like 1 or 2 takes and then he's out. Like it's just, he's that good. He comes in, records the stuff quick. He's good. He's precise. So I'm sure it would be weird to think they're like a Springsteen kind of thing going on where it's like, hey, there's a chance he's going to pick some song out of the catalog we haven't played in 20 years. So be prepared and just know it, or just like work your way through it. It's like, what a nightmare. I mean, that obviously works for like 3-chord kind of traditional folk structured like rock and roll songs like that. But maybe like skate punk, old school hardcore, probably not going to work as well. So that guy's got to be pretty good to be able to like go, okay, we're playing an 18-minute long song with little to no breaks. All right, we're doing it.
NOFX is just like Fugazi.
I was literally just about to say that shit. I was thinking, okay, no set list. They just fucking go into
start a song.
Yeah, I was literally thinking that the entire time. That's awesome.
You go into a show, right? You're going to have some beers. You're going to like stomp around, do whatever the hell you do. And it's like a punk show. And it's like, hey, so the next song we're playing is 18 minutes long. Like, how do you keep their attention? Obviously, by this point, like NOFX had a diehard fan base. You know, they'd been around since '83. They were elder statesmen by this point. The Decline came after probably their most successful period from like 94 to like 98. You know, they're doing well. Like everybody's got cars in the garage. Everybody's got a house. Everybody's able to pay their kids through college, that kind of thing. You know, what other type of like artistic, you know, chance do you take than writing an 18-minute long song and present it to a crowd that is used to 1.5 minutes to like maybe a 4-minute long song, and 4 minutes is pushing it on some of these things. Like, you know, you look at like Punk and Drublic, there's, I think the longest song, maybe 3.5 minutes on there. Or you look at the album that came before it, So Long and Thanks for All the Shoes. It's a short record. Like even the ska, like reggae song in there is like 3.5 minutes. So you present this to this crowd and you just go, you know what? If they don't like it, fuck them. Right. I think that's the benefit of like making music is obviously you hope that you put music out that you like and you want to play. And if people like it, so be it. Right. That's the big deal. And Mike's not a dumb person. He's obviously a business owner. He was able to start Fat Records. He's obviously able to keep a band afloat for 40 years at this point. He also has a degree in political science, I believe.
Which makes sense for the song, certainly.
Some of the lyrical concepts on the song, obviously, like how insensitive Americans are, touches on the prison system and how it's just created to keep people of color in jail. I mean, it even goes as far as like some of the influence for the song itself was like Robert Downey Jr. getting arrested for his drug possession charge in his own hotel room. And I believe in the interview, it's like Mike was just kind of going on. It's like he wasn't harming anybody. He was in his own room, minding his own business. Yes, he was doing drugs, but he was minding his own business. And cops at the door, bing, bang, boom, you're going in. You know, yes, Robert Downey Jr. going to jail for 6 months is probably vastly different than, you know, some guy down the street, you know, living in poverty going to jail. Vastly different thing, but it all kind of circles the same drain when it comes to that. But I mean, he was hitting on like a lot of these political topics he's hitting on. You could release this song today and it still holds up because we haven't changed. I mean, there's a fucking Eisenhower quote in here in the song. I believe it's the man who used to speak, because Eisenhower is referred to as the man who used to speak. I don't know any of this. I'm just an ignorant fucking chucklehead from Arkansas. Like it's hearing this and reading about the lyric concept is like, oh, okay, this is like knowledge that I can hold on to, and it's not just like another cool song. I mean, gun control, police state training. I mean, there's a whole bit in the song talking about you shoot to kill or something like that. There's a lot of lyrics tying in with that. You know, I mean, there's the great line. I believe it's there's the line about he changes it up and he just changes a couple words and it all almost sounds like the same line. Something about that's my first kill, and then under the brush down in the weeds is my the body of my brother William, and it just keeps kicking in, and it's like, God, I like that creativity. I'm sure it is very hokey when it comes to like songwriting, but I love that he can spin a line, use the same melody, put different lyrics in a line, but it still almost sound identical to that, because it makes you go back and go, what's he saying now? Like, what's different? I mean, there's even references to like Wayne from the MC5 getting arrested. You know, a $20 bag got him like 10 years in prison or something like that. I mean, there's lines about that. He's digging deep for a guy that's just like considered just a drunk in a punk rock band. Like this is pretty deep shit. I'm not the most politically sound human being, but I know you and Swindle absolutely are. And Swindle more so than probably the both of us. And this rang a bell with me hearing it and going like, okay, this is something that would definitely fit in today's environment with releasing like, hardcore records, punk records, anything like that. Obviously it was written from the perspective of a man that was very wealthy. But still, nonetheless, digging into politics here big time. I know what I took away from it with the lyrics. Did you guys take anything from it? I mean, from first time listen?
It reminded me a lot of kind of like Dead Kennedy's lyrics.
Yes.
In that Dead Kennedy's lyrics were very political, but also kind of like the tone of them, because Jello was kind of a fucking asshole, and his lyrics were just like snotty and like making fun of people for not being as, I don't know, like smart as he thought he was. But I don't know. I'm not trying to say that the lyrics on this album are like making fun of people or being like, you're stupid, but it's kind of like the same nihilism kind of, to me, that Dead Kennedy's put off.
Yeah, it is very like sarcastic. It's certainly got like a humor to it with, a scathing humor, I guess. But I would agree. I didn't get like the impression when like when you listen to like Jello talk or anything like that, where it's like, he's like very above everyone.
There's an arrogance to Jello.
Yeah.
For
Whereas,
sure.
Like,
Mike doesn't necessarily have that.
He definitely feels like a just kind of like blue collar voice of like, yeah, things are dumb and people are really stupid, but I'm also not like, you know what I mean? Like who am I to judge too? But like, I don't know, things are definitely not good.
When Dylan, when you were talking near the beginning of the episode about how he like bags on everybody, I was gonna like jokingly say that he's the Matt Stone and Trey Parker of punk rock.
I mean, that's not far off. That makes complete sense. He has bagged on his buddies' bands. I mean, I believe there wasn't beef, but he's definitely there have been jokes made by that whole band. I mean, their whole stage banter is like just cutting people left and right. I mean, jokes in the history about Blink-182, Green Day, you name it. I mean, they all, especially like the Green Day guys, they all kind of grew up in the same scene. Rancid, you name it. They're pretty cutting. That's their whole stage. That's their whole stage banter is like in between song banter, something's going on. And now it's, 40 years on, they're still doing it. I mean, a band that started out just like, we'll get to that. 40 years on, like that's still their stage banter. They're still just like laying into people like, oh, okay, no big deal. And they just kind of deal with it. Mike kind of touts himself as a pretty truthful person. And that gets him into a lot of trouble sometimes. I believe it's alluded to in that interview, where he's like, hey, you know, I kind of tell the truth a little too much, and sometimes it gets me in the trouble. But he's like, I'd rather tell the truth than, you know, have to create some sort of elaborate lie or anything. And that definitely reflects on this EP. I definitely get it. You know, it definitely didn't strike me as him going, hey, you know, a certain group of, you know, less educated people in the US are just below me. I never took that. I always took it as he's making a point to say there are very educated people out there that are incredibly ignorant to their own mistakes and incredibly ignorant to the effects that they have on everybody else. And a lot of them typically are politicians. And that's what he's kind of guns a-blazing going out with this thing. Yes, there is a very sarcastic, very tongue-in-cheek, you know, vibe to the lyrical concept of this record, because that's how he writes. You know, it's in every NOFX record, there is a song like that. I mean, there's a song on a later album called Creeping Out Sarah, which is about Tegan and Sarah, and creeping them out. I mean, there's God, I think there is a song on Pump Up the Volume, that is, I think it's called Bottles to the Ground. And obviously it's about starting a fight, but it's written in like a very like, you know, traditional song structure. I mean, there's a song on, God, I'm going to butcher the title. It's called A White Trash, Two Hebes and a Bean. It's El Jefe's first record. And there's a song on there called Liza and Luis that is about it's about a woman who is unsatisfied in her relationship and like goes to the city one day, meets a woman and has a lot of fun. So they are very like, he's very tongue in cheek with a lot of it. But he's also pretty dark, and there's some later songs that are really rough to listen to by him.
There's a lot of it in this song, and you know, we cover a lot of different topics. You mentioned they played it once, you know, or at least the first time they played it, it was like 10 years. They also played it at Red Rocks, which you had like shared with us that video. I'd never seen it before. They kind of did a like an S&M type thing. You know,
that's funny.
There was like something that he had seen this composer or conductor do that like inspired him to say like, hey, we should get this orchestra or this like little symphony out here and have them perform with us for the Decline live at this event and make it a pretty special thing. And then they didn't just like, you know, play the same parts. They like wrote their own parts for the song.
I remember him speaking on what he saw the guy do originally that made him interested in doing this. And the guy may have even already created an orchestration of the Decline. And that may be what Mike saw or like had heard or something. And he contacted the guys like, hey, we should do this live. And the orchestrator, I believe his name is Baz, B-A-Z, grew up playing in like punk bands and everything. But even he admitted like NOFX came to be much later after I was already like a jazz musician. And when he met Mike, I believe he told Mike, he's like, yeah, you've already wrote kind of something that's very akin to like a symphony because there's not repeating parts. You just have repeating motifs and themes. You know, the horns, there's certain melodies that keep coming back into play, slightly altered. There are different, you know, lyrical motifs that come through that you could definitely do with this. And the recording with the orchestra sounds very Danny Elfman-esque playing behind it. A lot of xylophone, a lot of stuff like that. I believe there's even a joke like in the live stage banter of like, did Bad Religion have a fucking bassoon? Like going on about that. It's really interesting. That has also been released on Fat Records as an additional EP that you can pick up. It's a cool performance. To see a band like obviously in their 50s, like going out playing this 18-minute long song they have to practice.
Yeah.
I believe they did like a set of like like classics and then played this, or hell, it may have just been this for the set.
I mean, when I watched it, it was very tight. Everybody was on, I would assume that if you're a classically trained musician, you're going to be show up prepared, is often the kind of mindset. But yeah, hey, we're going to be playing a punk song.
Yeah.
An 18-minute long punk song for a group of just, schlubs.
It's and I think that's a really that's a venue I would love to go to. It's a really beautiful venue. And I think Mike actually said the only overdubs he had to do may have been like a couple vocal spots on the recording. Like he's like, yeah, you're live. Like I'm older. He's like, higher elevation changes your vocals. He's like, yeah, it's part of it. That's kind of what live records are, right?
Yeah.
There's no such thing as a real live record.
Yeah, it's all fake. I remember finding that out about like Kiss Alive or whatever, and
I always go to the Pantera one.
Yeah, all of these like live records, it's all bullshit. They all lied to me. I don't even really like live records that much. I don't anyway, either. So
it's all bogus. I'm like, oh yeah, it's another record. Like, all right, it's just a greatest hits without it being a greatest hits. I got it. I don't want to like gloss over the fact we've talked about the lyrical concepts and the themes of this. This thing is full of bass riffs. It's definitely, Mike's a bass player, and there's some pretty wild bass riffs on this thing. I mean, it opens up with this great kind of fast hardcore themed distorted bass riff that's probably just a rat ran straight into like an old Ampeg or something. It sounds really good. Everything in the mix cuts in really well. Every instrument has its own place. It all sounds good. The riff that I always remember is, I think, at the halfway point of the album, and it is a wild sounding bass riff. And it's if you've ever listened to RKL, there's a song called Clocked Out, I believe, that makes me think of that RKL song. Like it is really, really fast shit. And Mike has this really interesting way of playing bass. He's self-taught. He plays all upstrokes. Like it's no downstrokes. It's all upstrokes the entire time. And I don't know how he does it. I've attempted to do it just after a while. It's like, I can't, my brain is so just like, all right, the Metallica records, it's all going to be downstrokes all the time. My shoulders have the hurt, that sort of thing. But he's like playing with a light pick, playing upstrokes, and still gets this pretty great sounding tone out of whatever he's doing. It's also a good thing to point out that he recorded most of the guitars on this thing. Basically, vocals, guitars, production, bass. He obviously didn't do drums. Well, actually, there's a cymbal overdub at the end of it where it sounds like this bell kind of going off. That's him sitting on top of Eric playing and just hitting the top of the bell of the cymbal. It's like, how do you keep in time? How do you do it? There's also points on the song where they're off time and they did it on purpose. They're like, it just makes sense. I mean, there's vocals that crack on it that make sense, that sound good. It's great. It's a great EP. And I don't have a whole lot of EPs I'm a big fan of, but this is just one I can put on I actually had to tell myself in preparation for this recording that I can't listen to this that much because I've listened to it so much because this might be one of my favorite songs of all time, just because it's so well structured, so well written, and it keeps me interested the entire time. It's like watching a really well done movie almost. I've completely ignored the fact that the movie is 2.5 hours long. Like I'm in it and I go, oh, that was it. And you're at the end of it. You're like, wow, that is a fantastic piece of art.
It's I've heard the terms like theatrical, or I guess you could say cinematic. I mean, it definitely plays out in a way. It plays like an opera, obviously, that we keep talking about. But I didn't never felt like there was a lull, or I never really felt bored while I listened to it. It's not like my favorite kind of music in the world, but it was certainly cool to look back on. And, kind of now in the present day, this band is, knocking on the door of 40 years, and they actually just announced that they were going to be breaking up.
Yep. Calling it a day.
I guess I want to ask you, what do you think this band's legacy will be? What does it mean? I don't even know exactly why they said they were breaking up, so I don't know if you can shine a light on that. But 40 years, calling it quits.
I think they originally announced it in early 2023. because it was going to be 40 years for NOFX at that point. And they did a farewell tour, which has taken them, the better part of a year. They've done select cities throughout the US. I think they're going to do a few more this coming year. And then there might be a couple Canadian dates and maybe a South American date, and that's it. And Mike, in the more recent interviews, has basically stated, that's it. He's like, we're done. We're not playing any more shows. We're done. This isn't, I believe he makes a knock at Black Sabbath in the podcast. He's like, we're not Black Sabbath. This isn't going to go on for 6 years. He's like, we're done. This is it. And it seems like all the other members of the band in some interviews I've seen have basically stated the same thing. Like, it's done. I'm sure there's many things. I couldn't tell you why they're doing it. I mean, when you've been doing something for 40 years, I'm sure you get to a point where you're like, what more do I have to accomplish? What more do I have to do? Maybe there are other things I want to do. I think Mike in the last 10 years or so has done a play on Broadway. He just opened up a museum in Las Vegas, the Punk Rock Museum, that has been doing really well. He's also got other creative endeavors that he does. I mean, he's got, obviously he's still tied in with Fat Wreck. And I'm sure he's got other labels and things he's tied into. So who knows what he's doing? This is a band I've never seen, but I will never get a chance to see. And that's fine. But it is weird that I like picked this up much later on, and got into this band just because, again, I missed it. I went straight into like as aggressive as you could get with like metal and death metal and black metal and you name it. And like, I had to come back around to get into some of the more accessible stuff years later of like, oh, I'm 30 years old and I'm finally going to listen to like this, kind of melodic punk, band and listen to them do their thing and really get a kick out of it. Cause it brings in like Mel Brooks and like satire to like punk rock. And I really enjoy that.
Any final thoughts on this song? Any final thoughts on the EP, I guess?
I mean, hearing that they had an 18-minute song piqued my interest at first. I had a lot of pre-existing notions going in of like, what's this thing going to sound like? What is, where could I even begin with an 18-minute long punk track? Is it just going to be noise? Is it going to be, silence for, 12 minutes of it? What's going on? And I walked into pretty well a structured masterpiece of sorts from this band. If this band hadn't released anything after the decline, again, they could have called it a day. I think ultimately this will be the thing that this band gets remembered by the most when it comes to their recording output. Yep, they've had bigger hits. They've had records that have sold more. They've done so much more, but this will be the thing that they get remembered by because it is so just bizarre for that type of band. If you haven't heard it, listen to it. If you have heard it, subject your friends and make them listen to it.
Yeah, start a podcast and make them listen to this. Swindle, any final thoughts on the song?
There is one thing. I was gonna say it earlier, but I couldn't really find a place to get in there. In that interview of the podcast that Mike was on, he said they were like the day before they were gonna release this album. He like went into the pressing factory and like made them stop making the CDs or whatever, and everybody got mad at him. But that's when they like went and added like the horns and all the shit at the end of the album. Like that was so necessary because like the last 3 minutes of the song would have been so boring if the horn section and like the Casio keyboard or whatever it was, and like the chime or whatever they're whacking at the end of the
stomping
album. Yeah, and
I forgot to touch on that.
The stomping is from a Sex Pistols song, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Damn,
they just slowed it down.
See that? That's wild.
Yeah, that was a good decision by Fat Mike to put all that post-production crap in the song.
Dude,
no, he's right.
That's a really hard thing to say, like, especially for an 18-minute song. We have all these parts. Like, how do you know it's just fucking done? To the point where they're like they're literally making the CDs, and you're like, stop the presses. We gotta add the horn section and the stomps in here.
So he stops it. And some guy at the label's like, what the fuck are you doing? You can't do this.
His label.
His label. Some guy
Is
says,
it him
what
just
the
looking
fuck?
in a mirror? What the fuck are you
Yeah.
doing?
And
I'm stopping this thing.
He
No,
actually
you're
has-
not.
I think someone tells him, maybe his wife at the time, she's like, it's your label. You can do whatever you want. He's like, fuck, all right. But no, Swindle's right. Like if those overdub parts and those layers weren't in there, yeah, the back half of the song would be pretty simple, pretty straightforward. And after 18 minutes, you don't just want simple, right? You know, or 16 minutes in, whatever it is, you need something to kind of carry the song off because it does fade out with these great kind of lyrical back and forths with like Eric Melvin and like Mike screaming these things back and forth. And it just keeps going on. Matter of fact, before we end, I believe the whole back half of the song is a 32 chord progression, or like it's 32 chord progressions with no repeating parts. Like he does not hit the same chord twice. And that is something he does in a lot of his music. It sounds like, oh yeah, it's an E to an A to a B or whatever it is, but it's like variations of those chords that still makes it in the same key. You're just playing, you know, here's an add 9, here's an add 7, you know, something like that.
He wrote his own Rainbow Connection. I'm so proud of him.
He did. And
that shit has a lot. I'm just thinking of all the chords.
No, it's got a ton of chord changes in it. It absolutely does. And this one does too. And, you know, maybe we end it with that. You know, Fat Mike wrote his Rainbow Connection.
I'm proud of him. Good job, bud. All
Big
right.
Fat Mike.
Now is the time we usually talk about what we've been listening to lately. So what I've been listening to lately is a album called Embalmed in Decay by the band Carnal Tomb, released on November 3rd. This is just really good caveman-esque death metal. The bass is really loud in the mix. You can literally hear every single note he's playing. You know, give this a shot. Give it a listen. It's fun. You'll enjoy it. If you like bands like Gate Creeper and like anything that was recorded in Florida in the 90s, you're probably going to enjoy this.
I got another death metal track that's out, Ball and Chain by Pittsfield, Mass, Escuela Grind.
Fuck yeah.
Putting out an EP, death metal EP, but it's like spelled like death metal. It'll be out on January 12th through Monarch Heavy. They also announced that they will be going on a pretty extensive tour throughout January into February with bands like Slow Pulse, Bonginator, Frog Mallet, you know, just stuff like that. I know they're going to be in Chicago on February 8th at Reggie's, so that's pretty cool. Of course, I'm not seeing too many stops by y'all, but you know, whatever. Maybe it's a trip for you.
Touring doesn't exist here. You know, it's like Joseph Merrick down here.
Another
That's the
one
second.
for
Why are you
Julia.
talking about Elephant Man so much?
Because the South is all fucked up. Here's the armpit. Here's the middle finger. Here's the toe. You know, Texas is the taint.
There's 4 tracks on this record, this EP. So we got one already, Ball and Chain, which also has a music video out. And then one of the interesting things that I noticed on here as well is the 4th song on the record is called Meat Magnet. It's going to feature Barney Greenway of
that's going to be
Napalm
fun.
Death on it. So definitely looking forward to that. Check out Ball and Chain.
My suggestion it comes from my fair city of Louisville, Kentucky. Coliseum. They just released an album called Infinity Shit. And they spelled their name without vowels.
Yeah.
It looked like the Patterson guy who plays guitar and does vocals, also recorded the bass, and they have a drummer on the album, but they said that all 3 people in the band took part in the album, so I'm not really sure what that's about. But it's a return to the old Coliseum punk rock style. They recorded 2 or 3, maybe full lengths that
like post metal, wasn't it?
Kinda. It was like more songy. They had hooks and shit, but they've gone back now to being punk rock.
Get that shit out of here.
Get those hooks out of here.
Get that crap out of here. Thank you so much for joining us again this week on Riff Worship. You can follow us for any updates on the show at Distortion891, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We'll be back again next week talking about more riffs for Dylan, Swindle, me. You've been listening to Riff Worship. Bye.